Hello, thanks very much for coming along to my talk. We're here today on the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people, and I'd like to acknowledge them as the traditional owners and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and Aboriginal people of other communities here today. Sovereignty was never ceded, and I support a First Nations voice to Parliament. If you aren't sure who I am, I'm a software developer. I've been a software dev for about 20 years, or is it software engineer? I'll have to change that. And about half that time leading people in teams. I'm very passionate about coaching good practices. And currently I've started my own startup. Apparently a stable paycheck wasn't something I was comfortable with. I'm also the founder of the community group Tech Leading Ladies, and we've been working to bridge the gender gap in tech since 2017. We started in Melbourne, and since lockdown we went remote, and now we have people all across Australia and New Zealand. So my talk today is a little bit different from things I usually talk about. I love talking about tech and implementation and good practices, but I'm going to talk about myself for a while and my journey through my career in tech and how this led to what I know about creating sensible defaults that build high-performing and diverse technical teams. So along the way, we're going to unpick why we don't have many women in tech, and especially in leadership positions. But don't worry, it's not just a rant about the patriarchy and the state of the world. They've closed the doors, so you can't leave now, which is pretty cool. I have a bias to action. Sorry, I talk with my hands. I'll stop that. So you'll absolutely leave with some really good takeaways of how you can solve some of these challenges around inclusion in your teams. Just curious as to who's in the room today. Is there anyone that's a manager of people? Excellent. Is there anyone who would like to be a manager or a tech lead soon? Fantastic. And hopefully everyone else is here because they want to hear about how to create advocacy for underrepresented groups in tech. Okay. So I'm going to start my story way back in the 80s when I was just a small child. Actually, I was a really small child. Was anybody else fun-sized growing up? No? Just, yeah, a few fun-sized people. Yeah, actually, it wasn't so much fun. I certainly fell into that old cliche of being picked last for the sporting team at lunchtime. The other kids would look at my size and make a snap judgment about what I could and I couldn't do. And I lived up to their expectations, unfortunately. I just opted out. So why would you try hard if you can't do it? And this further reinforced my lack of skill or ability. And all through primary school, I never put my hand up to participate. And everyone else just got better and better. And I just never tried. And the sad part of this was when I got older and I started doing more individual sports like martial arts, etc., I figured out I was actually pretty sporty and pretty good at it. So it's a bit of a shame. And I'm sure that everybody has a story like this they can relate to. Maybe it wasn't, being picked last for the sports team, but it could be music or maths. Or reading and writing, whatever it is, we usually all have something we can identify with, is where we felt like we were part of the out group and that we didn't belong. There was no safety in giving it a go, and so you just didn't in case you failed and proved them right. I actually had a really happy childhood, and I'm going to fast forward 20 years now, and I'm a uni graduate and a junior developer, and this was what my first workstation looked like. And somehow I had ended up right back in the out-group, but this time in my chosen profession. Now, I didn't realise tech was male-dominated until I was in it, maybe a bit slow on the uptake there. Yeah, there weren't many women at uni, so that should have been a bit of a clue. But my first job as a junior developer, I was in a small consultancy and there were 6 developers in the team. And half of them were women, including the founder and CTO. So I had really strong role models from very early on. I didn't have that imposter syndrome coming into the industry. And I was able to build my skills without realising that I was part of this out group. And it was just after this, and I can still remember the first time that I felt rejected by my peer group. Still a junior dev. Does anyone remember a time before Stack Overflow and IntelliSense? Yeah? Good, all right, you're all my people. And we used to, if we wanted to figure out how to code something, we would pick up one of the books that was sitting on our desk and flick through it and find the code snippets. And then we got fancy and there was Alta Vista, and we used to get on that and look up news groups, and we'd type in the question we had, and then 3 days later we'd get a response back which would give us a solution. Yeah, like good times, like the internet made everything so much easier. And I can remember that I was reading through these questions once, and I saw something that was a problem that I'd solved a couple of days before, and I was like, oh, I felt like a grown-up, you know. I could actually contribute back to this discussion. And I was pretty excited by that, so I sent off my code snippet, my solution, was proud of myself. And the author wrote back and said, thank you very much, that's great, worked fine. And then there was like all these other comments in the thread that I really wasn't expecting. And there was this whole entire debate going on, not about the code I'd written, but about my gender. And the subtext of this was that if it came from a woman, it wasn't acceptable, or it probably wouldn't work. And so this thread went on, and the participants decided that it was more likely that I was a French man named Michel who spelt his name in the feminine, who lived in Australia, than it was that I was a woman. And so, you know, the code was accepted and off they went. But have a think for a moment. If you're a junior developer and these are the messages that you're getting, how do you feel about being part of that group or belonging in that group? And it really did impact me, because from that point on, I've opted out of, you know, contributing to Stack Overflow and open source, because I get really worried about how my code's going to be accepted and perceived. And this is a shame. I'm not alone in this either. So GitHub's done a lot of research, you've probably read it, that shows that women have their code accepted actually more frequently than men, but only if their gender is anonymised and can't be inferred from the name. So I stubbornly battled on and was jumping forward again, and now I'm a senior developer. It's about 10 years later, and this is my dev team that I'm in. So lots of companies that release their numbers around women in tech tell us that it's between 17 and 30% women that they have in their technical teams. Now, if you are woman identifying, you know that this number is somewhat inflated, because quite often you're the only woman in the room. There's not 17% of you, there's not 30% of you. And in fact, when we talk about software engineering functions, it's less than 10%. I've been giving talks like this for a long time, and that number hasn't gone up at all, which is interesting. And what this means is that most of the decisions that we're making about the software we build are being made with no women in the room. And we know now that this has implications for innovation, for creating inclusive tech, and for team performance. So now let's look at how this group breaks down in terms of gender. So the way I've done this is purple people are women identifying, and blue people is everybody else. And that's me. And I wasn't a senior dev, I was a team lead at this time. So even though I loved writing code and building software, there's a lot of microaggressions in our industry, and it feels like death by 1,000 cuts. And I really felt like I was in the out group. One example is I was having a hallway conversation with a peer at this point, and I said, wouldn't it be nice if we had more women in the team? I was literally the only one. And he said, yeah, I guess we should, but we really don't want to lower the bar. And this wasn't the first or the last time I'd heard the lowering the bar conversation in my career. So once again, have a think about like how that might have made me feel and how I internalised that. it just makes it really hard to sort of lean in. You just want to opt out. I've really felt, and I'm not alone in this, that I've had to work a lot harder than my peers around me to get the same level of recognition. So every new person that joined, every new colleague I had to prove my cred over and over and over again before they would take what I was saying seriously and actually trust my point of view. And this is really exhausting. So it was about this time I really felt like I had had enough. I was exhausted. I thought it was all too hard. I love building code and software, but I really felt like I didn't belong. And so I started Googling, what can you do with 10 years coding experience? Like, how is that a transferable skill to anything? I just didn't even know what another career would look like. And I don't think Google did either, because there was no suggestions of alternative career paths, but I did see article after article about how women leave tech after 10 years. And I was like, okay, so it's not just me that's feeling this way, like it's a thing. And so I started researching why, and I learnt about things like diversity and inclusion and unconscious bias, and I'd never heard these terms before. And you know, there's lots of light bulbs going off, and I was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to leave tech, I was going to stay and I was going to try to change it. And I did. I didn't change all of tech, I'm still working on that one, but for the company I was in at least. So I set up a diversity and inclusion committee, and I grabbed some like-minded people, and we came up with some ideas, you know, how we could sort of refactor our hiring process and recruiting and onboarding and get more women in. And then we realised we had a pipeline problem, so we started teaching girls to code at school, and we started bringing women into the industry who weren't before, like career changing in, and we created internships and such. And we worked really, really, really hard for about 2 years doing this. And I was so proud of what we did. We were very successful. Within 2 years, we took it from 3% women in tech, which is just me, to 35% women in tech, which is huge. Like, it's very rare that you find a technical team that's 35% women in tech. So let's see what our team looks like now. Right. So what's the problem with this? No takers? Okay. We had worked really, really hard to bring women in, but the women that we brought in weren't getting promoted. They weren't getting promoted as fast as their male peers. In fact, they weren't getting promoted at all. So we'd spent a lot of time bringing them into the company, and we had not made sure that they were set up for success. So the real kicker is the people that were doing all this work to support women in tech were all women in tech. So we were spending a lot of energy trying to create an inclusive environment of belonging where we wanted to thrive in, and that energy was detracting from our technical contributions. So we weren't growing those technical skills. So come promotion time, who's getting promoted? It's not the women. They're spending their time trying to build inclusion and belonging. And probably the saddest part of all of it was that we had failed to make any systemic change. So we were just sort of tweaking things around the edges. And as soon as I left the company, it all fell away, and their numbers just plummeted once again. And anecdotally, I've heard it's not a very inclusive place for women in tech to work anymore. So this experience led me to create the community Tech Leading Ladies. So I shifted from trying to bring women into the industry to making sure that once they were here, they were going to be successful in leadership positions. Now, I've come to learn that what I've been talking about is called the broken rung effect. And it's not just me that's seen this, of course. This whole thing's been very anecdotal up until now, so I'll give you a bit of research and a few stats. So McKinsey shows us that women in tech are being promoted in the early years 2 to 3 years slower than men, if at all. There's only 52 women being promoted to management levels for every 100 men, and this is what's leading to the high attrition of women in our industry. So we're leaving at nearly double the rate of men. Another factor for us leaving is the perceived incompetence of female developers. And so please, I remind you of the GitHub study that shows that we are as good at coding, just people don't think so. So to summarise all this, women do have the skills, and bias exists in evaluation and is holding us back from career growth. So I'm going to talk a bit about how this plays out in our day-to-day. So in the Tech Leading Ladies community, we get a lot of coaching questions on this topic, usually from people who have received feedback that they find perplexing and they want to understand how to progress. If anyone saw Birgitte's talk before, she was talking about the feedback of, well, you should just be more confident. Really resonated with me. So some of the things we hear are, I always get exceeding expectations in my reviews, and then when it comes to promotion time, my boss says he doesn't see me as a senior. I get positive feedback in my one-on-ones all year, and then at review time, I'm told I'm underperforming. The performance feedback I got was, I need to stop speaking in a girly voice because he can't understand what I'm saying. And when I ask what I can do to work towards leadership, I'm told I just don't have what it takes and I shouldn't even bother. So these are all real quotes, and I've heard them more than once as well. So, all of these statements demonstrate one fundamental problem with our system. There is no objective assessment criteria for software developers. Skill attribution is made subjectively and inconsistently between genders, but I like to assume good intent. No one is doing this on purpose. And to understand why unhelpful feedback is so prevalent, we're going to take a look at a typical career path for a developer. So you start off as a junior, you're not really sure what you're doing, but you're having a go. You're learning to write code, you're learning how to be effective in your own development environment. Your team is very supportive, they don't expect a lot from you, and before you know it, you take a small incremental step up and you're a mid-level developer. And you're starting to get pretty comfortable with your skill, your confidence as a developer is growing, you can come across some more complex challenges, and then the seniors show you sensible defaults, and they give you some guardrails, and they send you on your way, and you keep developing your skills, and then it's just another small step up, and you're a senior developer. And by this time, you feel like a rock star, your skills are solid, you think you could do anything, you've got a lot more confidence, you like being the go-to person in the room, you're helping to make or set technical direction, and you get pretty good at this, and you think, yeah, I'm ready for management. I kind of want to tell people what to do. It's only going to be another small step up, right? And then I'll be there. But unfortunately, it's not like this at all. And in fact, becoming a manager for the first time, you go from being very, very, very good at your job to being a very junior person in the role that you're in very quickly. And it gets hard very fast. So it takes time to build people management skills. New leaders have no idea how to review performance. They don't know what to do when someone asks them for a promotion, or even how to have a hard conversation and get someone contributing to a higher level. And yet, we're required to do this from day one while we're still driving the technical direction of our team. So the best way that I can see to start fixing the broken run is to give managers sensible defaults so they can refer to it and help guide them in how to manage people. We need clear, objective, and detailed frameworks that allow you to perform your leadership responsibilities without guesswork. And this removes the unintended bias from decision making. So for those that said that they were managers, what did you do the first time you had to hire somebody? Any takers? Well, I know what I did the first time. I wrote a position description for that role. I didn't go and find one. There wasn't one, so I had to write it again. And then I had to write the interview questions from scratch again. I didn't ask anyone. I just kind of went, oh yeah, this is what I'm good at. I'll ask these questions. And this is what we tend to do. We write the position descriptions, or we write performance reviews or promotion packs based on what we're good at. And we pattern match what we see as good leadership without really referring to anything, or actually the worst part is our inexperienced peers are doing the exact same thing, but in a different direction. And so we're creating a lot of inconsistency, which causes frustrations in our teams. So this leads us to the question of what you do to fix the broken rung. It's not about tweaking the edges of recruitment, and it's not about teaching women to code who didn't code before, and it's really not about lowering the bar. It's about making systemic change that means everybody is being evaluated against the same criteria, and everybody is given the same opportunities to grow their careers. So we need to use data for our decision making and not unconscious bias. And we really need to recognise and reward contributions that build belonging and inclusion in our teams. And so how do we do that? Here's my first sensible default. We got there eventually. Use good tech career growth frameworks to make equality possible. In my time leading various engineering teams, I've created these career growth frameworks, and I've seen just how powerful they can be. They're an excellent way to drive capability uplift and cultural change. And they really do work to help you find people that have been previously overlooked for growth and promotion opportunities. Anecdotally, I've heard of women who have used these frameworks when they've been introduced, and their bosses said, oh my goodness, I didn't realise you were doing all this. Why didn't you speak to me earlier? And they've said, well, I've been asking for a promotion for 3 years and I just sort of gave up. So it really does help you put data behind who you're promoting. Okay, so it's the afternoon. Everyone's getting a bit tired. So I thought we'd do a little bit of audience participation. We're going to create some sensible defaults together. We're going to build a career growth framework. And I've heard that Brisbane is the best audience participation city. So a few of the other speakers have said, oh, yeah, you'll be all right in Brisbane, but maybe not in Sydney. So anyway, we'll see how this goes. What I hear is it's as good as it's going to get. So anyway. Has anybody seen these career growth frameworks before? You have one in your organisation? Few shaking of heads. Yeah, they're sometimes called like skills matrix or levelling frameworks, a few more nods. Okay. If you haven't seen one, I'll show you an example. So this is one that's fairly typical. You can see we've got skills listed, so all the skills that you require to be a software developer down one side, and then there's the different role titles across the top, and then kind of tells you what you need to do to be considered performing in that role. So for a junior developer, your front-end skills need to be at level 1 or beginner level. For a mid-level, you need to be proficient in your front-end skills, and then as a senior, you need to be an expert. And so come review time, you sit down with your manager. It's the first time you've spoken about your performance all year, and so they might say to you, yeah, I've seen you do some front-end stuff, but expert, are you really an expert? I don't see you as an expert, so I'm going to say probably not this time. Your back-end skills, well, I don't know, you pair program a lot, so I'm not sure if it's you doing it or is it the other person doing it. So you're probably not a 3, maybe you're a 2, so you're not performing there. Databases, you only need to be proficient at that. Yeah, I've seen the store procedure look pretty good, so maybe I'll let you have databases. You're pretty good with DevOps, except remember you broke the build last week, so, maybe not, because I'm going to use my recency bias. And unit testing, thanks for reminding me that you implemented and rolled out TDD in our teams, which reduced our change failure rate. So I guess you could say that, you're pretty good at that. But overall, you're not really performing. So, maybe we're even going to put you on performance management. Now, if you took a photo of this, I saw some people do that. This is kind of like what not to do. Because there's a whole bunch of stuff missing from this, right? We're all smart people. We know what it takes to create high-performing teams. And that is actually what we're going to do together in a minute. But some of the other things that's wrong with this is, what does proficient mean? So you ask 2 developers, they're going to give you 3 different answers, right? There's no clear definition of what each of these levels mean. There's also no clear definition of what front end means. And so people use their own experiences and they try to interpret it. And this is where we end up with the inconsistencies. Because we're filling in blanks, we're using our own biases and our own journeys to figure out what that should look like. So now we're going to work together. Let's see how we go. I'd like to ask you, what other skills and behaviours make inclusive and high-performing teams? And I'll give it a few minutes before doing a reveal. There's 1 participant typing. Okay, let's see what we got. Oh, no, I'm going the wrong way. Why didn't that work? Damn it. Oh no. Complete fail. Come on, Slido. It's supposed to be a click to reveal. Has anyone else used this before? Let's try it one more time. No. It worked on my machine. Can you even restart it? What if I just click this? No. No. This is going really, really well. That'll teach me to test in production. I'm going to ask you to call out some answers. Who would like to let me know what they wrote down? Thank you.
Focusing on deliverables and working backwards from there to work out the most efficient way of getting there.
Yeah. How do we execute? What's our delivery practice look like? Yeah. Coaching. Yeah.
Setting and adhering to standards.
Yes. Yep.
Constructive feedback and collaboration.
Yeah, collaboration, giving good feedback. And, sorry, I didn't say yours out loud. Setting standards to help guide people.
I was going to say, raise issues, even if that might not lead to consensus.
Yeah, so challenging and raising issues, calling out things that aren't quite right. Sorry, what was that? Yeah, continually learning and increasing your skill set. Yeah. Gee, I wish that had worked. So yeah, we spoke about delivery and execution skills. So this is what I love Google for, all the research they do. So their research around Project Oxygen told us that the big determining factor of a high-performing team is not the individual skill sets that the people have in the team, but actually how the team work together, collaborate, track and visualize their work. So delivery is such an important piece of how we work. We spoke about really good communication practices as well. And so anything that's really proactive in communication can help you to build inclusive practices in your team. These ways of working can help belonging. So for example, we haven't spoken about XP, so pair programming, test-driven development, clean coding. These are all really good ways to proactively communicate what you're about to do and to guide people and help people along the way. And a lot of what we spoke about, coaching, mentoring, we call those glue skills as well. If you're not familiar with Tanya Riley and her work on being glue, I really recommend looking her up and listening to that. It really tells us that it takes much more than just our technical skills to build high-performing teams. We need to recognise and reward the behaviours that support and strengthen the team that enable us to do the technical skills. And a lot of the times, all the things we spoke about just there go unrecognised and unrewarded, and people are not held accountable for them. And the people that do contribute to them tend to be those in the out-group that want to create that sense of belonging that they're not feeling themselves. I did have a bit of a backup slide in case that all went horribly wrong, but I think, thank you for your examples. We managed to cover a lot of it. Another thing to be mindful of is if you think back to the example I showed before, there wasn't a lot of detail or clarity about what each of those levels meant. So get really good details, be very verbose. We want to see some hyperspecificity and we want to see examples. And this makes it really clear to people what they need to do to be considered high performing in their current role and also to get to their next role. Including those glue or core skills that mean that we can enable those technical contributions, looking at delivery and execution, and also inclusive practices. I'm going to talk a little bit more about inclusive practices. Dave Farley's talk inspired me to put this slide in because I've been coaching people in good practices, development practices for a lot of years, and I was an XP developer. So I'm very passionate about clean coding, pair programming, and test-driven development. And I have found that they are three key ingredients into creating a good sense of belonging in a team. But I feel like every time I've mentioned them in the last 5 years or so, they've really fallen out of popularity. And I almost get this allergic reaction from a lot of people to these things. I'm not sure where that's come from, maybe because they're hard and people don't want to bother learning them. But they really, really do help you to bring people in and create a good sense of belonging and help people get up to speed in a very psychologically safe way. Okay, let's get back on track. So this brings me to the next sensible default, which is recognise and reward behaviour that build inclusive, high-performing teams. This is making sure that you're calling out all the skills that go towards building high performance and a sense of belonging for people, and that you're holding people accountable for doing so. Get the men in your team working towards supporting and strengthening as much as the women are, and hold them accountable for inclusive communication and collaborative work practices. Oh no, it's another one of these. This is not going to go well. I'll just go back a sec. So has anybody been involved with creating these frameworks inside their organisations? You have? Excellent. Just Pete, one more. Okay, a few, yeah. I've seen quite a few of these, and which is excellent. I love the fact that we're going to take steps towards creating them. I also find that there's a few common mistakes that people make when they start creating these frameworks. I was hoping to ask some folks about their experiences creating them. Maybe if this one doesn't work, we can just have a chat about it. You can probably infer from the questions. Does anyone want to have a go and we'll see if it works? So the question is, who was in the room when your framework was created? Was it mainly white dudes? Did you bring in diversity people from outside engineering, like maybe the lady from HR? Or did you have multiple engineers from underrepresented groups? Let's see what happens when I click the clicker. Nope. Fail.
It says there's people contributing.
It does.
And there was a lot on the previous one as well.
I set the click to show results setting, and I'm clicking and it's not doing it. Okay, so that didn't work anyway. So what I have heard from people that create these frameworks is they underestimate the amount of time they're going to take. Usually, you know how like in coding, the first, 20, the last 20% takes 80% of the time. Creating these frameworks is pretty much the same thing. And so it goes underestimated and people get to a certain point, usually before they've defined a lot of these supporting and strengthening skills, and then they just kind of roll it out very quickly, or they don't really roll it out at all, and it's this thing that kind of hangs around and doesn't really get used. They also fail to have any representation of underrepresented groups in the room. So usually it's created by leaders, which is important. I understand that. They know what their teams need to support them and what information they need. But unfortunately, a lot of the time, that tends to be white men. So we need to be really conscious and mindful about who we're bringing in to help create these frameworks. There's going to be someone, if your organisation's a certain size, there's probably somebody that's really struggling to get recognised. See if you can figure out who they are and bring them along to help you create it. My next question was, how consistently is your framework used? So because we kind of fail to finish them and then we fail to roll them out properly, they can be used inconsistently. And sometimes, I've heard, they're even used against people in underrepresented groups as a way just to demonstrate to them that they're not performing, where not everybody is being held to the same standard. So it's very important that they are used consistently. They form part of every conversation that you're having. And this leads to the last pitfall that I see. You need to make sure that your framework underpins all of your people processes in order to create a culture of inclusion and high performance. So that looks a bit like this. It's used for everything. It's used for hiring. Gaps identified in hiring can lead into really good actionable feedback. Feedback makes expectations clear, and it's only based on performance and not personal traits. Performance reviews make clear what needs to happen to reach the next level, and the goals from that feed into development plan actions, and those actions are meaningful and promotable. So what we're trying to do here is make sure that the assessment data we gather is driving goals for growth, and the actions that we're asking people to do are being recognised as promotable. So, if you don't have this as a foundation, your culture will just crumble and fall. Which leads to my final sensible default: underpin everything with your career growth framework. This ensures that your people are getting consistent and actionable support in uplifting their capabilities and growing their careers. And it means that people decisions are being made with data and not unconscious bias. So to wrap it all up, use hyper-specific career growth frameworks to make it clear to engineers and managers the behaviours and contributions that really make an impact in your team. Recognise, reward and hold people accountable for contributions and behaviours that build belonging and enable equality, and underpin all your people processes with the same career growth framework. Use this to drive decisions in hiring, promotion, feedback and everything. And if all of this seems a little bit too much and you just want one simple takeaway, just don't be this guy and you'll be right. So that's me. Thank you very much. If you want to get in touch, you can find me on LinkedIn. If you're a woman identifying or non-binary, please join Tech Leading Ladies at techleadingladies.com. And if you want to talk about career growth frameworks, you can get in touch with techdiversitylab.com. Thank you. And
Have any questions for Michelle?
I think one's quite simple, but do you have a off-the-shelf framework that you can give us? Like, I tend to work for startups where we're just struggling to survive, so it's hard to find time to kind of formulate these sort of things.
absolutely, these things take so much time. I didn't even plant him, that was a real question. I purposefully didn't want to make this a vendor talk. Yeah, I've created these over and over again, and kind of, I think it was the fourth time I was coming to create one. I was like, oh, am I really going to write this thing again? And I went, oh, I know, I can develop things. So I built it as a SaaS product, and that's what Tech Diversity Lab does. So we can sell you an off-the-shelf solution.
Michelle, thank you for that presentation. Very interesting. Can you comment on performance reviews?
Yeah?
Yeah, I have always felt that they are terrible.
Yes.
Because I think if you're hearing something for the first time in the performance review, I, as a manager, have failed. Right? So at best, I always felt that maybe a performance review is a summary at best of the things we have spoken about over a period of time. But maybe I'm totally wrong about that. What are your thoughts?
Sometimes performance reviews are a process imposed on us by HR teams, or that's what they feel like. And I understand that they're very important, and the HR teams are responsible for making sure everyone's performing. So I understand where that's coming from. But as a developer, you're deep in the weeds of code, and then your manager goes, oh, you need to fill in your performance review, and it's the last thing you want to be doing. I think that performance conversations should happen throughout the year. So as a manager, I love having one-on-ones very frequently with my people, and each of those should be talking about their goals and their performance, and what I might need them to do to be contributing stronger, and also looking at where they want to get to and helping them take actionable steps towards it. So I completely agree. The performance review should have no surprises. It should just be a continuation of the conversation you were having last week or last month. And that's why I like the idea of the performance reviews are the things that lead to your career development plan actions, which are the things that say you're ready for promotion when you've done that.
Hey, Michelle, more of a comment than a question.
Oh, there it is!
No,
Refer
I was
to the mansplaining comment.
Yeah, right. So I am really curious around what do you do if you are very early on, your roles aren't well defined, you don't have leveling, even the promotion process, it's unclear if we have a distinction between junior, sort of middle tier, senior, for example. how do growing companies start with like doing HR properly?
I think it is a problem of scale. So I've worked in a lot of scale-ups, and this is kind of like my happy space. Yes, ignore the fact I'm now in a startup, but I really like coming into a company when they've done the startup journey and everything's been really scrappy and fast, and they've moved very quickly and they've broken things, and they're starting to really feel like their practices and processes are causing friction now where they didn't before. And I love helping them to define their development practices to enable them, but also to help with their people practices. And I feel like this is the sweet spot of introducing it. I've spoken to managers that are at that point where they're like feeling the pain of scale up, and they want to know how to define those career pathways for their people. I've also spoken to managers who are like, I've got 4 developers and they're already asking me what career progression looks like. So, it makes sense for them to be putting something in place now. So it sort of depends, like everything, what pain are you feeling right now? And if something like this can help you out even when you're tiny, then go for it.
I think we've got time for one more question if there was one.
Do you have any tips for making sure that your growth framework doesn't turn into like a giant spreadsheet where you put all the numbers in and then a grade spits out at the end, and kind of keep it connected to your skills that you actually want people developing in, not having them just kind of tick a box to increase their numbers?
Yeah, spreadsheets are hard, which is why I built a tool. I could never get the data out of the spreadsheets that I wanted to. I felt that was really challenging. But like any good framework, it just needs to be the foundation of a conversation. So I would never ask someone to go away and like self-assess and it'd be a tick-the-box exercise. You need to sit down with your manager, or if you're the manager, sit down with your people and talk through each level and their contributions and make sure that it's an agreement. You both agree you're on the same page. And also, as a company, you need to keep updating it as well. So each year you review your review process, very meta, and you go, are these still the contributions we want to encourage inside our organisation? What else can we be encouraging? Do we now need to get better at security? If so, let's make sure that we start putting AppSec competencies in our framework.
I'm sorry, I know you were meant to have a last question. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on 360 reviews. So Basecamp used to famously have them, and now they famously took them away. So I'm interested in what you think about 360 reviews.
I used to also love 360 reviews. I'm concerned that 360 reviews can be used against underrepresented people. So if you're asking people's peers to rate them, they're bringing their biases in. And so sometimes also, even in our competency frameworks, we use language like this person is known as, or is the go-to person. And so quite often people who are underrepresented don't get those titles and those labels. And so they can suffer from 360-degree reviews. So if it's a data point, I think it might be worthwhile, but whoever's using it needs to be very conscious about where those thoughts might have come from.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for making everyone in the room advocates for diverse teams and what to do.
Thank you.